In Elizabethan and Jacobean times, 12 nights after Christmas, January the 6th, the Feast of the Epiphany, would traditionally be a time of reckless licence abandon. In Shakespeare's play, this high-spiritedness is seen in those gay revellers, Sir Toby and Sir Andrew, ably assisted in their pranks and foolery by Feste, Fabian and Maria. However, there is one character in the subplot who stands apart and isolated from this determined merriment: Malvolio, the Countess Olivia's steward. Even his name infers a desire for discord, whereas Sir Toby Belcher's surname hints appropriately at joyous, gluttonous excess. Malvolio's first name comes closest to the adjective malevolent, meaning bearing ill will. So what should we make of this character who initially seems hell-bent on pompous standoffishness, only to be cruelly humiliated by his co-players in the subplot? Well, stay tuned. This is Schofield on Shakespeare. Malvolio makes his first appearance in Act 1, Scene 5, when invited to give his opinion on Olivia's fool, Feste. Disdainful pomposity drips from every word as he rushes to disparage Feste's wit. "I marvel your lady takes delight in such a barren rascal. I saw him put down the other day with an ordinary fool that has no more brain than a stone." As a court fool, Feste would have been reliant upon his mistress's continuing favour to earn his living, and would doubtless have been displeased by Malvolio's description of him as barren, meaning unfunny, and the implication of his own stupidity in being outwitted by brainless half-wits. Fools would need to have been intelligent and quick-witted in order to produce their satirical and often humorous observations. If Olivia were to share Malvolio's views, Feste could have found himself without paid employment very quickly. And so Malvolio's words imply an inhumane lack of empathy. He, like Feste, is reliant on remaining within Olivia's household for his livelihood. Yet in his first appearance, his savaging of his co-household member seems unnecessarily brutal. Olivia picks up on this and concludes that Malvolio is sick of self-love. She adds, "To be generous, guiltless, and of free disposition is to take these things for bird bolts that you deem cannon bullets." Bird bolts were harmless, flat-headed arrows, and Olivia is telling Malvolio that he shouldn't overreact to Feste's playful puns and linguistic twists. He shouldn't see them as thunderous cannon bullets. If he does overact, it implies something unwittingly about his own character, that he isn't generous and guiltless, that he doesn't have a free disposition. Olivia's imagery infers that Malvolio may have hang-ups that stifle him. Beneath his upright, apparently virtuous exterior, hidden feelings may be being suppressed. Yet in spite of his name, and in spite of his over-the-top reaction to Feste fulfilling his role as a fool and casting satirical comments on all and sundry, Malvolio is unquestionably a loyal servant. Olivia is decadently in mourning. For 7 years, if we are to believe the message given to the Duke of Illyria's gentleman, Valentine, for her dead brother, and aims to cut herself away from all visitors. Malvolio follows his lady's instructions to the letter by refusing to admit the pert Cesario, Viola in disguise, who has been sent by the wannabe suitor, Duke Orsino. He tells Olivia with some vexation, "I told him you were sick. He takes on him to understand so much, and therefore comes to speak with you. I told him you were asleep. He seems to have a foreknowledge of that too, and therefore comes to speak with you." Malvolio's use of anaphora emphasises his perplexed frustration at the stubborn refusal of the visitor to depart, and is humorous, especially with the contradictory use of the connective therefore. If someone is sick, the logical subsequent phrase would be rather different, something like, "I told him you were sick, Therefore, he has decided to go home and call again tomorrow. So Malvolio is clearly a useful person to have in your employment. He is loyal, dogged, and prepared to lie if these are his instructions. Later in the same scene, he buys Olivia's cock and balls story about Cesario leaving a ring behind and agrees to lose a few ounces of his dignity to run after him to return it. Indeed, Olivia's recognition of Malvolio's importance to her is shown much later in the play, in Act 3, Scene 4, when, referring to what she thinks are signs of mental illness in Malvolio, she says, "I would not have him miscarry for the half of my dowry." The verb miscarry now refers just to a mother's premature loss of a baby during pregnancy, but in Elizabethan times also meant more generally coming to harm. Olivia clearly cares about the emotional welfare of her officious to others stewards, so much so that she claims to rate him on a par with part of her own future prosperity. Malvolio may be valued by Olivia, but it would appear she is the only one. His fellow household members despise him for what they see as his hypocritical puritanism and obscenely false sense of self-importance. In Act 2, Scene 3, Sir Toby, Sir Andrew and Feste are drinking and revelling in the middle of the night and making a right racket in the process. Maria is also present, having entered a few moments earlier and unsuccessfully tried to curtail the carousing. Malvolio seems in his element as he cries out, "My masters, are you mad or what are you? Have you no wit, manners nor honesty, but to gabble like tinkers at this time of night? Do ye make an alehouse of my lady's house, that ye squeak out your cosier's catches without any mitigation or remorse of voice?" There is no question that if you were woken up in the middle of the night by drunken singing and raucous laughter, you would be annoyed. However, there is something about Malvolio's tone and language that implies that he is taking a perverse relish in the whole situation. Verbs such as gabble, meaning talk nonsense, and squeak, aim to deflate and emasculate, and imagery such as tinkers, meaning lower class travellers, and the alliterative, cosier's catches, humble cobbler's songs, move away from a factual description of the din to suggest that Malvolio is revelling in this opportunity to show off his own comparative restraint and human decency. Olivia is a countess, Sir Toby is her uncle. Opportunities to dress down a member of the aristocracy are always going to be few and far between. No wonder someone, who it transpires later has pretensions and aspirations of his own, seizes the opportunity to censure with such gusto. In a production of the play by the Filter Theatre Company in March 2014, members of the audience were invited to join in the revelry on stage. Members of the cast rushed into the auditorium to pull up initially terrified volunteers to join in a huge conga line which snaked onto and around the stage. Some boxes of pizza were produced from nowhere, and audience members tucked into a slice on stage to reflect the carefree, carnivalesque atmosphere, a mood that was shattered with the sudden appearance of Malvolio roaring onto stage with the previously quoted lines, "My masters, are you mad or what are you?" This dramatic device directly involved the audience in the fun of the naughty late-night shenanigans and resulted in Malvolio seeming all the more an outsider. Rather than tell of 4, he had around 40 on stage to bellow at in disapproval. It's much harder to sympathise with someone who has been woken up late at night when you yourself have been personally involved in generating the entertainment and the laughter. Malvolio is sulkily unsuccessful in his attempts to guilt-trip his masters into quietening down, although those on stage during the filter production did shuffle back to their seats rather sheepishly. And on his departure, Maria gives an insight into the superficiality of his character. She rages, "The devil a Puritan that he is, or anything constantly, but a time-pleaser, an affection ass that cons state without book, and utters it by great swaths." Puritans were religious extremists who took a hardline view of light-hearted pleasures, and were quick to categorise and label supposed sins and sinners. Given that they were notoriously opposed to the theatre, a notable Puritan used this simile to describe the theatre as like a sink in a town whereunto all the filth doth run. or a bile in a body that draweth all the ill humours into it. It seems easy to speculate where both Shakespeare's and the contemporary audience's sympathies would lie. But crucially, according to Maria, Malvolio is not consistent in his quasi-religious intolerance. He is in fact a shallow sham. As a time pleaser, he can appear a Puritan when it suits him. So for example, when naughty late night drinking means he might be able to get one over on his social superiors. However, no genuine conviction lies beneath his actions. He learns texts off by heart, cons state without book, so that he can impress others by regurgitating it in huge chunks or swaths. An interesting comparison could be made with that famous philosopher Jacques in As You Like It. He too likes to breezily dismiss the interests and occupations of his fellow human beings. Yet in Act 2, Scene 7, Duke Senior addresses these lines at him. Most mischievous foul sin in chiding sin, for thou thyself hast been a libertine, essential as the brutish sting itself. Given that Jacques himself used to be a debauched man of sensuous sexual desires, it seems rather hypocritical of him to be dispensing self-indulgent and highly rhetorical rebukes on those who simply do what he did in the past. Now, Maria's description of Malvolio is less specific in that it implies he criticises through convenience rather than conviction. She isn't able to say, like Duke Senior, that the man used to be an all-night drinker and partier, or that on his nights off he is surreptitiously downing shots with his fellow stewards. But it is clear that there is something uncomfortable and artificial about both Malvolio and Jacques adopting such an aloof, judgmental attitude towards others. The idea of Malvolio being a genuine Puritan is smashed in Act 2, Scene 5 of the play, when it becomes clear that he possesses a desire for material wealth that would be inconsistent with a puritanical rejection of the worldliness of society. Believing he is alone on stage, he fantasises and daydreams out loud and reveals his hidden desires. To be Count Malvolio, he struts before conjuring up this image. Calling my officers about me in my branch velvet gown, having come from a daybed where I have left Olivia sleeping. Just as in Act 2, Scene 3, it seems the opportunity to elevate himself seems more significant than being woken up by a drunken din. So here it seems as though this presumed sexual gratification of having Olivia as a bed companion comes secondary to the satisfaction of having the power and trappings of privilege. In Malvolio's fantasy narrative, he is dispensed breezily with a possibly naked Olivia in order to report something that interests him far more, an ability to give orders to others, his officers no less, and hold state resplendent in an embroidered, branched, rich velvet gown. Indeed, is there the subtlest of hints from Shakespeare that Malvolio is so self-obsessed that he would rather masturbate in the glory of his imaginary ascent to power than share some of his lustre with anyone else, least of all a woman? Left alone as 7 of his people head off to find Sir Toby. 7? Would it really need so many to summon that drunken wretch? He envisages, I frown the while, and perchance wind up my watch, or play with my, some rich jewel. Certainly this line was played for a sexual laugh, with an accentuated pause after play with my in the Filter Theatre Company production, making Malvolio seem all the more, and unfortunately the bad language is appropriate in this context, a wanker. Malvolio, of course, is not alone on stage at this point. Sir Toby, Sir Andrew and Fabian are listening in alternately outrage and in hysterics at gaining this crucial insight into a man they despise. They also know that Maria has dropped a forged love letter, purportedly from Olivia to Malvolio, in which the latter is seconds away from discovering. Maria has deliberately included a degree of mystery and challenge to this letter, and this is important to the overall success of the project. Would Malvolio really believe Olivia would write an explicit love letter to him out of the blue, given their different social standings and current relationship as employer and employee? And if he did, which I grant is possible given his degree of self-love, would he then not adapt a similarly brazen approach in approaching her about her love, which would presumably result in the whole monstrous plot being blown out of the water? Malvolio has to first assess that the handwriting in the letter matches Olivia's. He decides it does and says, "By my life, this is my lady's hands. These be her very C's, her U's and her T's, and thus she makes her great P's." This line is hilarious to see on stage and fascinating to pick apart. In Shakespeare's time, cut would have been slang for a vagina. There is of course a similar version, albeit a deeply offensive one today, and to pee still means to urinate. Shakespeare chooses these letters to give his diverse audience a good belly laugh. This kind of joke will always be much easier to get than a Festian or Touchstonian line that plays with words in a devilishly clever way. The question is, why does Malvolio pick out these particular letters? And does he realise what he's doing? Are the letters deliberately selected to continue his earlier fantasising about Olivia asleep on the daybed? And in the process, do they reveal a crude insight into repressed sexual desire, which lie dormant beneath a fake puritanical exterior? Or is it purely coincidental that the letters Malvolio decides are particularly characteristic of Olivia's handwriting spell out a slang term for the female genitalia? If the latter, it makes him seem rather stupid and curiously unaware of the nuances of his language. If the former, he comes across as disgusting and perverted. I incline towards the idea that Malvolio doesn't realise what he's spelt out, and this increases the distance between himself and the audience and the other characters on stage. As a result, we laugh at him rather than with him, and in doing so, reduce the amount of future empathy we may have for any difficulties he finds himself in. Indeed, the fact Malvolio so easily falls for Maria's ridiculous letter points to both a lack of sharp, questioning intellect and a ludicrous sense of his own potential for greatness. But nonetheless, the letter does reveal a side to Malvolio that has not been seen up to this point. Reflecting on the discovery that Olivia loves and desires him, Malvolio unleashes an exuberant lust for life. He cries, "Daylight and champagne discovers not more. This is open. I will be proud. I will read politic authors. I will baffle Sir Toby. I will wash off gross acquaintance. I will be point device the very man." The change in Malvolio's language is glorious. The pompous superciliousness of lines such as "Come, sir, you peeviously threw it to her, and her will is it should be so returned," has been replaced by the utter positivity of references to sunlight and flat, open countryside. The haughty passive tense has been replaced by simple, determined proclamations of "I will," and it is clear that Malvolio is hell-bent on moulding his character so that it meets Olivia's specifications exactly. But what a shame they are fictions invented by the ever-imaginative Maria. If we are to believe popular stereotypes, search online for the Telegraph article from July 2013, "Can a woman ever really change a man?" Then Malvolio's words reveal a laudable intention to adapt and conform in order to please the object of his desire. Unfortunately, from the audience and the other characters' perspective, this transformation in character, from steward's chain to bright yellow stockings, from thin-lipped frowns to endless smiling, from stuffy passive tense to guileless future, is so extreme that any sympathy we may feel for him as a victim of an outrageous con trick is far outweighed by our own amusements. In Act 3, Scene 4, Malvolio is seen with Olivia on stage for the first time since unearthing her supposed letter. Whereas producing the letter itself would have quickly revealed the truth, Malvolio instead elects to quote broadly from it, much to his mistress's utter bemusement. It is clear that he has spent a huge amount of time reading and rereading the letter, and as a result probably has the majority learnt off by heart, a skill which Maria would attest he is rather good at. But each time he says a line, Olivia becomes more and more convinced that her faithfully solemn steward has lost his marbles. Malvolio's first quotations from the letter and Olivia's reactions are, "Be not afraid of greatness, it was well writ. What meanest thou by that, Malvolio? Some are born great, ha! Some achieve greatness, what sayest thou? And some have greatness thrust upon them." In Trevor Nunn's 1996 film version of the play, Malvolio, played by Nigel Hawthorne, kneels right in front of Helena Bonham Carter's Olivia as he says these lines, his hands tightly around her waist, with a climactic movement towards her breasts when he comes to the camp word thrust. Both Hawthorne's body language and the earlier avowal that he will go to bed, aye, sweetheart, and I'll come to thee, show how Malvolio has utterly disregarded his previously held professed beliefs about restraint and has hilariously developed a keen desire for procreation. Malvolio's humiliation. He is imprisoned underground and presumed to be mad by his mistress before the truth is finally, painfully unfurled, could be seen as just recompense for his ridiculously pompous, haughty behaviour earlier in the play. His arrogant dismissal of Fester's wits, his sneaky tell-telling about Fabian, his all-too-ready willingness to be opposite with a kinsman, surly with servants. All of these are deeply unattractive behavioural traits, which you could argue need punishing in a play which is named after a subversive holiday festival. Nonetheless, the thought persists that Malvolio, like Lear, may well be a man more sinned against than sinning. The trickery is only uncovered in Act 5, Scene 1, and although Olivia hints at the possibility of future justice when she proclaims, "But when we know the grounds and authors of it, thou shalt be both the plaintiff and the judge of thine own cause," the modern audience, far more comfortable with the idea of a presumptuous desire for social ascension than its Elizabethan counterparts, are likely to feel that the treatment of Malvolio has been unnecessarily cruel. But of course, our impressions of a character will be influenced by directorial interpretation as much as Shakespeare's original text. To return to Filter's March 2014 production for one final moment. Malvolio spends the final half an hour of the play wearing just bright gold pants and yellow football socks. He looks totally ridiculous, making it impossible to do anything but cringe and chuckle at how a pompous ass has got his just desserts. The mood in Nun's Twelfth Night is darker, as Malvolio in Act 5 Scene 1 comes in pitifully covered in filthy nightclothes amidst open-mouthed discomfort from everyone else in the packed room. What you will make of Malvolio, I suspect, depends on your sensitivities, your own past experiences, and your own hopes for your future. This has been a Schofield on Shakespeare production, exploring the character of Malvolio in 12th Night. Thanks for watching.